part of the dysfunction in the United States. We are so polarized and we don't know how to have conflict conversations.
Context, time, place, setting. Then all of a sudden we can have these conversations, right? If we can lay this foundation.
Emotional safety and trust.
I need that advice more than anyone else.
Where the mind goes.
Dude, I haven't seen you in a while. It's been a few weeks.
It's been a minute. I think 3 weeks to be exact.
I think it has, because I was gone. I was filming in DC for a project, and then obviously there were the holidays here with Thanksgiving for some folks. How was being home and chatting with folks after the election? Was that a positive thing? Was it weird vibes? I don't know. I don't know what your dynamic is at home.
It felt like there was a little bit of walking on eggshells, and not necessarily in a bad way, maybe more of like a, hey, I'm just trying to make sure we don't start anything kind of way. But it felt a little bit different. And even if very luckily there wasn't any big explosions, there wasn't any huge issues, but we start to kind of realize that the way people say things, the way people react to things has an impact on other people when when a situation is colored by something as big as an election. And it definitely felt different. I felt like there was certain conversations that maybe weren't appropriate around certain people. I think there were situations where someone wanted to say something, maybe avoided it altogether because of what it could imply or how someone could react to it. And I think at the end of the day, it's all meant out of respect, but sometimes it definitely feels like, oh wow, there's definitely a divide between certain members of my family, and divides feel uncomfortable sometimes. But we just working through that definitely was a challenge unique to this year, although it did definitely had memories of 2016 and 2020 as well. So, we've only been around for, what is this, our third or fourth election as, adults in our early 30s here. So it's interesting as we start to accumulate more election cycles, you start to realize that these feelings are cyclical. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they should repeat themselves, right? I think there's definitely ways to have these conversations in more constructive manners. And I know you have this situation with you and members of your family as well. You didn't go home for Thanksgiving, though, right?
No, I was just lazy. I didn't want to drive through the cold because my family's back in Utah, and it's not that bad of a drive, but sometimes going through the mountain pass is a little gnarly. And honestly, I was just tired. I had a really good group of friends back here in Colorado that were doing a Friendsgiving, and I'm more interested in that most of the time anyway. So it was good. It was good to be home. But as a result, I didn't really have to have hard conversations over the dinner table that maybe a lot of people did. And I will be going back home for Christmas time, and I'll be curious to see, what conversations come up for me. And something I'm always wrestling with, and the older I get, maybe the more the more I lean on the side of let's have the conversation, is I think part of the dysfunction in the United States, I'm not going to pretend to speak to the dysfunction in other countries, but is we are so polarized and we don't know how to have conflict conversations. Thinking back to your story about Thanksgiving just now, right? I would do the same thing. I'm such a pleaser. I hate fighting. I hate, tension. I hate all of those things. I feel so uncomfortable. And, I used to be someone who was so addicted to just keeping the peace at all costs, And then I think there are other folks on the other side of this spectrum from me who are like, go home and have the hard conversations and teach your family the right way to think about what happened with the election, right? I definitely hear that from some of my more activist friends that are in the more progressive space. I tend to be more in the middle, which is, of course, I want more people to see the world the way I see it. I also know that that's just not how the world works. What I really crave, what I really, really crave is more people just having a healthy conversation where when they walk away from it, maybe they don't agree, but they understand why the other one thinks the way they do. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's something you and I are getting better and better at, honestly, is sometimes we really think the same and sometimes we don't, but we always have a conversation, And I don't know how we can intentionally design our culture to shift in that direction. Because if we don't, I really think we're going to constantly be in these crazy polarized cycles.
Two things come to mind when you kind of start to brainstorm. Okay, how do we have these conversations? And I think the first one is pretty obvious. It's context, time, place, setting. Right. I think about this a lot with other relationships in my life, especially like with my wife. Right. There's certain conversations that I need to wait to have. Right. There's a right time to have certain conversations, and there's definitely a wrong time. Specifically with my family, anytime alcohol is involved, probably not a good time to have hard, difficult, polarizing conversations, right?
Yeah, probably not.
So maybe that's when we steer clear. Although, ironically, that's when sometimes
When they
people let things slide, and people are a little bit more loosey-goosey with their words. But I've learned that, there are right times to have certain conversations, and there are wrong ones. Sometimes that means having to hold a reaction to not exacerbate an issue, right? I think a couple times this weekend that came to mind where, someone said something and I could have gotten very reactive and a little, defensive, but I'm like, time and place. And I held that conversation off until a better time, right? Maybe in the morning during coffee or something like that, when people's guards are a little bit more down and people a little bit more open. Time and place and context to conversations is really important. The other thing that came to mind in regards to having productive conversations is based off a business book I read called Principles by Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is a incredibly successful investor who has written numerous incredible books, but one that I really gravitated towards is called Principles, because it basically breaks down how to craft and create a very successful team in a business. And the biggest principle that he talks about, and it's actually very similar to another book called Radical Candor that you might have heard of before. Both books do a very good job of talking about how, in order to have very candid and open and honest conversations with people, foundation has to be laid in terms of being able to understand that everyone in this conversation is on the same page. Everyone has the same goal. Everyone loves and respects each other. And anything that is said is not said in malice. It's said in order to benefit the greater team. And what that means is we actually have to spend time before we have these difficult conversations laying the groundwork that says, hey, I love you. I care about you. I would never try to hurt you as a person. And even if we have differing views and I am passionate about those views, they don't reflect who you are as a person, and they don't reflect who I am as a person, right? I think, and this is not easy to do. This is something that I'm still working on with my wife. This is something I work on with friendships. It's something I work on with clients as well, where, I want to be able to give them constructive feedback. I want to be able to tell them, hey, I don't think you're doing a good enough job. But I'm not saying that because I don't like you or I'm being punitive. I'm saying it because I love you and I want you to be a better person. So laying that foundation to start allows us to have conversations where we disagree. Because even when someone says something and you go, ooh, that hurt me, I can take that personally if I wanted to, your brain goes, no, I know this person. We had this conversation that says that they love me and they care about me and they're not trying to hurt me. So maybe there's a different reason they said this. Maybe it wasn't to hurt me. Maybe it was insert reason here. And I think combining those two things, and again, not easy to do, but if we can find a way to do that with our family, then all of a sudden we can have these conversations. I can have a conversation with a family member and go, hey, why did you vote for this person? Why do you care so much about this issue and not at all about this other issue that, to me, this is the most important thing, right? If we can lay this foundation, this groundwork that says, hey, I love you, I'm on the same page as you, and I just want what's best for you, then we should be able to have these conversations and not get caught up in emotions and reactions.
Do you think you could sum it up in, you've laid a foundation of emotional safety and trust? And if you have those two things built into the foundation with that person or that group of people, that then it's a lot easier to get into
100%.
conflict conversations, right?
Yes.
Which are inevitable. That's part of life. Yeah. As you were talking, it reminded me of a conversation I had with my aunt a number of years ago. My aunt is pretty conservative, and I'm pretty liberal and progressive. So we're on different sides of a lot of values or things you might vote on politically, right? I have a ton I have a ton of respect for my aunt. When I was in a really difficult financial position, probably the worst I've ever been, I wasn't really in a place where I felt like I could ask my parents for help. And I was luckily able to move in with my aunt for about, I think it was about 6 months. And we got really close. We played games a lot, like most nights, which is pretty funny when you think about a young 20-year-old, 20 something, hanging out with somebody who's older, right? And playing games. And it was great. I loved it. It was like so wholesome, you know? And we really talked about life and deep things. And we built this foundation of trust and emotional safety. And then maybe 2 years after that was around the time when Trump got elected the first time. And abortion was another hot topic on the table. And we had gone and gotten lunch. And it was very clear in that conversation we did not think the same. And instead of both of us getting caught up in fighting about the points, I don't know which one of us did this first, but we moved away from trying to convince each other to just, I remember at some point asking her, why do you think this way? Why are you pro-life? Like, why? What is the fear at the bottom of that, right? Because almost always these things are tied to a fear we have, including me, right? On both sides. And we really got there. I really understood why she was so pro-life. And it ultimately came down to spiritual worldview and the way she saw abortion as genuinely killing a baby, right? And I do not hold the same spiritual worldview. I don't think that you're killing like a spiritual life when you do that. I think completely differently about those things. And so we didn't come out of that agreeing, but I understood. Like I understood why it was so important to her heart that we do away with abortion. And it's allowed me to move in the world a little differently and with a lot more understanding and compassion of folks who are pro-life that I just never had before, you know? And we had the conversation. That was the best part is we didn't have to leave anything on the table. We didn't have to avoid. We didn't have to tiptoe over eggshells. She understood why I thought the way I did and my why and what my fear was tied to that. And I understood hers. And I don't know. I've not been able to recreate that all the time by any means, but I wonder if we could just do that more when we go home with our families, get to the why and ask questions and be curious instead of arguing and trying to teach them, right? We all do it. We always try to teach our family or our friends why they're wrong rather than understanding why they think so differently.
You know what's cool about that is, and it's almost beautiful, but you can't really argue with someone's values, you know? And almost every decision, every opinion that we have can really be boiled down to what are my values and how does this opinion relate to those core values that I have. But it takes so long to really get down to the core value reason why you believe a certain way. And sometimes you don't even know why you believe a certain way, and you can't draw the correlation between how your values tie to your opinions. So it's hard to expect someone else to know that, right? So I think there's a bit of introspection of going, okay, if I do have hard opinions, I need to understand what values that I hold strong in my life are tied to those things, right? And then going back to the emotional safety and security that you had built up over this time with your aunt, right? We have to really do the hard work, not just over the holidays, but over the course of our days, our lives, our years, building that trust with these important people in your life, if they are people that you want to make sure stay in your life for the foreseeable future. We have to build that emotional security with them. And I think really what that looks like in practice is allowing room for people to talk and then not just reacting with your beliefs of their beliefs, right? It's just even if you have an opinion or reaction, withholding that for a moment and going, oh, okay, I hear you. Thank you for explaining that, right? I think it's being able to hear someone say something that is abrasive to you and not necessarily feel like you have to react to it, but also just being able to sit with it and go, okay, I know they're not the only person that feels this way, so it's not like they're wrong, right? maybe I ask some questions about and help them uncover what values are coming towards this. But going back to right laying this foundation, I don't think it's something that you can do in a day or a month. I think it really is an overtime thing. And there's not a, okay, we did it, now we can have this hard conversation. It's we're laying the foundation, so maybe we can have some slightly hard conversations. And then we have more foundation over the course of this time. And then we can start having these. But if you haven't had these really deep, meaningful conversations with someone in 6 months, a year, and then you just jump right into something as emotionally triggering as, the election and these values that inevitably get brought up, then you're just asking for people to get emotional and get reactive. And as soon as one person is reactive, then there's no such thing as a productive conversation when someone is emotionally heightened. So being able to just roll that back and go, okay, I hear you, I understand you, and thank you for sharing that with me. Maybe I don't share what my reaction is just yet, but just internalizing that's the reaction, and I don't have to fix them. I don't have to change them. I just have to know them. I think there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said in so many ways. One area that I feel a little bit differently is I think it's okay to be emotionally heightened sometimes. I think we have this story some in our culture that you can't have emotionally intense conversations, that we all need to be perfectly calm and step away before we can come back. I think if you're in an emotionally abusive place, then yes, you should all step, if one of you's that way or either of you are that way, step away and come back to you've cooled off a little bit. But I think there's also sometimes this negative judgment that if, especially honestly for people of color, I've heard that from a lot of my BIPOC friends, that it is not okay for them at work or at home with white folks to express rage or anger or sadness in the same way. And white culture often is like, go calm down and then you can come back. And I remember experiencing that honestly from my mother. I feel like I was socialized that way. If I was angry, I was not allowed to have a conversation. Again, there's a difference between being angry in a conversation and saying verbally abusive things and throwing things at somebody, right? There's a very, very clear line between those and being dysfunctional or functional, right? But I think we need to learn to be okay and lean into these conversations where there might be some tension. There might be some anger or sadness or, you know, I think the key maybe is in what you said of reactive. I like when you use that word because then you've started moving out and are probably flooded and you're not being intentional with what you're saying. So I think as long as you are not being reactive but being intentional, even if it's angry or sad or full of emotion, then that's healthy, right? That's how we can communicate through conflict together. I don't know. What do you think of that?
I think emotions. I think emotions are important for healthy, productive conversation. But I think it's challenging to know where that line is sometimes.
Totally.
And I think unless you do a incredible job of laying that foundation where maybe we've even had an explicit conversation about, hey, when I get emotionally heightened and I'm talking quickly and I'm using my hands and I'm pointing and I'm getting a little quicker with my conversation, that doesn't mean I'm angry at you. It means I'm passionate. It means I'm excited. It means this is how I communicate when I'm on a train of thought, right? This means I really want to get my thoughts out, and sometimes speaking quicker allows me to do so. It doesn't mean I'm angry at you. It means I'm maybe emotionally heightened, but I think, like you said, there's a big difference between being emotionally heightened and emotionally reactive, because emotional reactions aren't logical actions. They're based off of how we feel, and I can say, and I could speak for every single human in the world when I say this, but your actions or your emotions aren't necessarily true. And sometimes that's hard to know in yourself. Am I having an emotional reaction or am I having a logical response? So I think until you do the internal work to know where that line is for me, and then communicating that with the people you're talking to. And again, this is a lot of work. This isn't something that just happens. This requires over communication in some people's eyes. And I see this in the difference between my family and my wife's family. I mean, my family is over communicative.
Okay.
We are very, hey, I can sense you seem like something's up. What's wrong? Tell me exactly what's wrong right now, right? Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's fix this so that I don't feel uncomfortable by the fact that you feel uncomfortable, right? Emily's family is the opposite. Emily's family is, we're not going to have direct conversations. We're going to have indirect conversations. I'm going to hope that you know what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling based off how I'm reacting. I'm not going to say how I'm feeling, but I'm going to react, and I'm going to hope, and you better know what I'm feeling based off my reaction, or else it's your problem. Both those are detrimental in a vacuum, right? Both the over communication, because then we start going, okay, I'm actually not allowed to have emotions. I'm not allowed to have feelings. Every time I do, they get responded to and reacted on. So I got to be careful, and I got to control my emotions, because if I look sad, if I am actually, just a little tired and just a little out of it, I need to decompress, then people are going to be like, hey, what's wrong? Why are you upset? Or, oh, don't get so reactive, or I can tell you're getting really emotionally heightened. Like, I'm not, I'm just passionate, right? These are conversations that I've had in the past with members of my family. And on Emily's side of the family, it's the opposite. Everyone holds their feelings in. No one shares how they're feeling, right? There's no logical conversations. It's all emotion. And then no one ends up being able to actually say how they feel. So people are always just assuming how people are feeling and what they're thinking, and then they're reacting based off of that. And sometimes then they're making the situation worse by the reaction, because they didn't know what the actual feeling was that person had. So like we both have said, this is an incredibly difficult thing to manage, but God, is it beautiful when you do figure it out and you're able to have these conversations. And sometimes the same person that you weren't able to have this conversation with becomes the same person that you're able to have the best conversation with, simply by the fact that it's a different setting, it's a different context, emotions are down, right? There's more of this feeling of like, hey, we're family, we're on the same page, we're not fighting against each other, but the work needs to be done to be able to get there. And I think so many families across the country are not doing that work. And then they're wondering why every conversation they have with their parents is toxic and ends up being a fight.
Yeah. And sometimes it just is time. Something happened to me recently with a friend of mine who's almost like a family member, where we had argued pretty intensely about trans rights and my identity as a trans person. And that was about 6-7 months ago. And we didn't talk for a long time. We needed some space. And maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, we actually got a beer. And it's not like suddenly everything was different and we agreed, but we had a more constructive conversation. And I felt like we both heard each other differently than we could before, because we were more emotionally reactive rather than being as intentional. You know what I mean? And time, if you are both intentional people and you do the work, time allows you to mull things over. Time allows you to sift through your feelings and go, what are the facts? What are my feelings? Where do those feelings come from? Were those feelings from healthy places, or were those feelings maybe from fear-based places or dysfunctional, socialization by my parents, or whatever, right? So anyway, I'm still in conversation with this person. It's not like it's all wrapped up with a pretty bow, but it did give me hope that if you just continue to have conversations and you continue to be intentional and you continue to try to, again, come from that foundation of love and trust and understanding people's why and getting below the fear to understand what's at the root of things, we can hear each other so much better and more deeply than we would otherwise.
I need that advice more than anyone else, to be honest with you. Time for me is one of the hardest things for me to let happen, but it's one of the most powerful things that can help change the course of a relationship. Is just going, hey, let's pause and let's come back to this later. Or, hey, maybe let's not even decide if we're going to come back to this, but let's just let time do its thing, right? I'm a very impatient person, and maybe this comes back to the hyper-communicative family that I grew up in, but there's a problem, what's wrong, let's talk about it. And sometimes someone needs time to think, what actually is the problem? Right? If I just emotionally react, I'm going to say something that might offend you. But if I actually take time to go, I don't know what the problem is yet, let me come back to you. Let me ponder on that and figure it out. Then you can have some introspection and go, oh, maybe I'm thinking this because of a conversation I had earlier, or something I read, or something I saw in the news that's making me feel emotionally heightened, or or maybe I'm sick right now and I'm not feeling good. There's a member of my family that was sick over the holiday, and they had mentioned that, oh, I probably shouldn't have reacted and said the thing I said that way, but I was sick, I was out of it, I was groggy, and as much as that sounds like an excuse, it's valid. When we're in a physically weak place, then we start to react in an emotionally weak place. And I think having time on your side is a very powerful thing, because sometimes it means we don't have to actively work. We just need to passively work to let this breathe a little bit. And then let's come back and let's do some active work. And I think combining that passive work, the time, with the active work, the context, the laying the foundation is, I mean, it's exactly how you have these conversations with difficult people. And I'd say it's maybe indirectly, or maybe not intentionally, how we've built our relationship. Right? I think we've done such a good job of laying a foundation of like, hey, buddy, I love you.
Yeah,
And I know you love
totally.
me. And I know I would never say something to offend you, and vice versa. So I can say something that might hurt you a little bit or might trigger you. But then you can go, okay, I know Josh isn't trying to hurt me. Let's figure out why he said this, and let's maybe learn together from that.
Where the mind goes.